Thanks so much for being here. My name is Mark Moyer. This is the Win Again Clubroom. And I am excited to have Steve Ryan in the house because Steve, I first met him several months ago. And when I heard about his mission to really take a sport that I really hold near and dear to my heart, I played it in college and it was fantastic. And he and his team are really trying super hard to make it really a mainstream sport, and it really deserves to be. And I'm referencing obviously the sport of rugby, and rugby has a long storied history, but need to really get it, really crank it along here in the States. And that's his mission, among other things. And we'll be speaking about that, but I'm going to bring him in right now. But what I'll also do is just give a quick little 2-second background on him. Born and raised in Minnesota, went to school at St. Olave's and played football and baseball there. Did they not have rugby there at all, or you just didn't know about it? Or
no, they did. And again, my experience to rugby is those guys who couldn't make the football team that liked drinking keg beer. So the school I went to, that was definitely accurate.
And you didn't like drinking keg beer?
I did, but not for a team. Yeah, I can do that by myself on the side. Yeah.
All right. So anyway, well, Steve's been with the National Rugby Football League for 9 years, and I'm really excited to hear a little bit more about how the plan is going to be to get this mainstream and what's at stake. But first and foremost, I know you spent some time with NASCAR and working with them in branding and marketing, but tell me a little bit about what led to your sort of being introduced with NRFL.
No, one, appreciate it, Mark. Appreciating meeting many of you already in the club room. It's my first experience, which is pretty wild. I'm a big fan. I guess I can save Delta time and just do these trade shows through this club room. So it's been a fun experience so far. So thanks, Mark. Before I jump into that, I'm going to give you a little homework assignment, Mark, if you don't mind. Could you put a poll up? Because I didn't meet everyone. Could you put a poll on? I'm just curious how many people have played the sport of rugby, and maybe another poll, how many people are fans of the sport of rugby? And I tend to ask that with anyone I first talk to, especially people here in the U.S., because a lot of people don't know much about the sport. And I'm the first one. When I first was introduced to the sport, I was very similar to that. But quickly, my background, entrepreneur, as Mark said, I went to a little Division III school. Out of school, helped build a marketing agency. So marketing agency from digital to social, working with Fortune 100 corporations, built that to some success across the U.S. Headquartered here. I live here in the Twin Cities and Minneapolis. Part of that's been a decade in the NASCAR space. So for me, again, being a kid from Minnesota, NASCAR is not that big. The first time I went, call it 20 years ago, to Atlanta Motor Speedway, brought 3M, one of my clients there, brought Red Cross, one of my clients there. And I'll tell you what, that was an eye-opening experience, watching 100,000 people, watching cars make left-hand turns in 100-degree weather. And everyone is friendly for the most part. It's a very diverse group. So my stereotypes were wrong. But that truly unlocked a passion of mine of just sports and media and the impact it can have on people. And NASCAR is exciting. I mean, it's the one sport I can be shoulder to shoulder to Jeff Gordon literally a minute before he jumps in the car and starts racing. And it's quite the experience from a business perspective. But as Mark said, hey, I'm your typical stupid American. I played football, baseball collegiately. I did not know much about the sport of rugby. Met my partner, who's also an entrepreneur from the legal side, trained as a lawyer. He played the sport later in his life. And we met through circles, kind of came together, wanting to do something together. Ultimately, we found ourselves with an option to buy the Rugby Lions right out of Rugby England, the oldest team out there.
That's cool.
And that's really where my journey first began. And we stepped away from that deal and came back here and said, you know what? This sport that's played in 130 different countries, 900 million followers. Why is it not here in the most lucrative sports media entertainment market?
That's cool. So I just put in, so if you guys go into the poll section, you'll see on the far right of where we're chatting, both of those polls are in there. So feel free to go in there and just either have you ever attended a rugby match or seen it on TV, or have you ever actually played it? If you could just go in there and vote on those, that'd be great. What else would you like to know, Steve, from our fans here?
Well, and I'll say even with the chat, I'm very informal. So questions pop up. Hey, we're going to have people in this room that are maybe diehard rugby players that are or fans that are going to know a lot more about it than me. There's people that are going to be interested in more on the business side of sports media entertainment. So as we kind of have conversations, Mark, please, if anyone in the audience has a questions, throw something in the chat, and we'll definitely spend more time on topics that you guys want to discuss today.
Perfect. That sounds good. There's also a Q&A section you'll see on there too as well. So good. Looks like the majority of the folks here have not played it, but they've actually seen it or attended it. So that you've got a fan base, but I'm curious to hear, and if you want to pop it either in the chat or in the Q&A, maybe what is it about the sport of rugby that you didn't play it, but what's led to you becoming a fan or at least watching it? I'd be curious to hear what is it about this sport that gets you pretty jazzed about it?
Well, Mark, let me throw that question to you, since you got the mic here. Knowing you have a history in it, what drew you to the sport back in the day when you were introduced to it, and now do you still follow it, or what kind of attracts you to the sport?
Yeah. So to me, what I appreciated was several things. One is I'm not a big guy. I'm like 5'10"ish and a little. I was sort of a fast guy, but someone 5'10" would get annihilated in football. So it allowed me to maybe exhibit some of my speed with the ball. So I was either fly half or scrum half, and I would have the opportunity to really run. It's a very physical sport, which I appreciated. I also really appreciated the sportsmanship and the sort of the camaraderie of both teams post-match or even pre-match and so forth. It's a sport where you're not trying to annihilate and destroy and kill the opposition. You're trying to score tries. You're trying to win the match. But at the same time, it's very physical, but you're like, everyone is just so cool about it. And I think that's what really drew me to it. And certainly the post-match beverages didn't hurt.
Well, as my intro to NASCAR was the aha moments, I can say the same thing about rugby. Once I was made truly aware of the sport, it was that aha moment of, where the hell is this sport been my whole life? And why the heck is it not here at the highest level? I mean, it is one of the fastest growing club sports here in the U.S. for men and women, right? Approaching 900 clubs. It's not necessarily a division of varsity sports, still a club sport. That will be changing. But the beautiful thing also about the sport of rugby, yes, it lends itself to all body types, right? A lot of us probably played American football, right? But if you were a certain size, a certain body type, you were an offensive lineman. I don't care. You had to block the rest of your life, right? Who are the people that get the glory? If you're not a quarterback, receiver, or running back, that's it. The beautiful thing about the sport of rugby, you got the fast guys on the end, call them the receiver types, but then you get the big guys in the middle, more the tight ends. I'm not necessarily going to say the tackles in the football, but the tight ends of the world, the middle linebackers of the world. Everyone has to tackle. Everyone has to play defense. Everyone has an opportunity to be the hero and to score. Everyone can be the quarterback through passing and gameplay. So it truly lends itself to all different body types for men, but also for women, right? Women also play and love the sport. Even here in the U.S., about 37% of the fan base here are women. So it's an exciting thing to truly elevate both these disciplines, here in the U.S.
So I'll just kick right in with this question. What do you think is holding the sport back here in the States?
Yeah, I mean, rugby, it's a 201-year-old sport. Maybe some of you don't know the origins. Rugby England, in a makeshift game of soccer, William Webb Ellis picked up the soccer ball, ran with it, rugby was born. That was 201 years ago, right? So it has been in a club sport for the longest time. It was in the Olympics, 1920s, 1924 Olympics. Actually, it was the last time it was in the Olympics, the 15s. There's different disciplines, but the 15s was in the Olympics in 1924. And test question, who was the last gold medal winning country?
No way, not us, really. Wow.
U.S., 1924.
Kidding.
So 1924, a ragtag group of American athletes, against all odds, went over to Paris, France, came home and took home the gold medal in rugby.
Wow.
So the beautiful thing about that, and then, years later, kind of in coincide, the forward pass was invented in the U.S. and American football was born.
Yeah.
So rugby's been only professional since 1995. So although it's a 200-year-old sport, it's really only been professional since 1995. And even in 1995, I'll call it very semi-professional. Yeah. Players were starting to get paid, but still on a very amateur, semi-professional level. Rugby's just had to evolve throughout the years. Even here within the U.S., if we would have started what we did, say, 10 years ago, I don't know if it would have worked at the level that it needs to work at. Things had to evolve within American football from a youth standpoint, where a lot of youth participation is on a rapid decline. The NFL will continue to be massive and grow. College football will continue to be massive and grow. But yet you can't deny the participation within American football is declining. The benefit now is rugby is starting to see an increase in participation, because still at the end of the day here in the U.S., we are a gladiator society. We still like to crash, boom, and bang. And when rugby is played properly, it is a safer sport than American football. So there's a lot of things that have had to transpire here, in the U.S. that are outside of the sport of rugby. And even when you look internationally, private equity has started to realize that. And you can follow the money. You can follow what private equity does. They like to buy low and sell high, right? Pretty easy economics. But over COVID, rugby really started to struggle internationally. Premiership, which is a league out of England, they had to take in private equity. CVC invested in them. The almighty All Blacks. I'm going to assume a lot of you have heard of the All Blacks. They're the New England Patriots, if you will, of rugby presently. But they struggled during COVID, right? You take butts and seats and selling hot dog and beer at matches. Rugby wasn't diversified enough from a revenue standpoint. So they took in Silver Lake, which is a massive U.S.-based private equity firm. And now their rugby team out of New Zealand, which has a population of 5 million people, is worth over $2 billion.
Wow.
Right? So
the
timing is just right now to bring it to the next level.
You've seen the All Blacks are?
All Blacks are worth over $2 billion.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing.
Right.
Where do you mentioned earlier that it's safer than football, and I think people that watch it and see, there might be some blood here and there and whatnot. What do you see? How do you see it as safer?
Yeah, so in rugby they call them the laws, right, or the rules of the sport that are constantly evolving to continue to make it safer. So compare that to this last Super Bowl. I remember a guy was running down the sidelines. The guy made like a horse neck tackle. 15-yard penalty, first down, and game moves on. You do that in rugby, you're red carded, you're out for the game and probably multiple games. So they take that very seriously. Anything kind of chest level and up is off limits. So dangerous play is prohibited. Even the last Rugby World Cup, if any of you watched, that was in Paris, the championship game, their Super Bowl, a massive event. A guy made a high tackle. He was red carded and he was out. That put New Zealand down to a full player for the rest of the match. So even within the NFL circle, Pete Carroll, who is the former Seattle's coach, Roger Goodell, the commissioner, they're on record stating that NFL should adopt rugby style tackling. It's truly the rap type tackle. I'm not saying there's not injuries within rugby, because there is, but yet you can see more the cauliflower ear, the crooked nose, from things that do happen within the sport.
But it's interesting because you don't see as many of I don't think anyway, concussions, they still happen, but you don't see it as much, I think, anyway. And which makes it's almost counterintuitive because you see men and women running around without any helmets, but it's the same thing as, you know, in the old days with hockey where the goalies didn't wear helmets and they, for the most part, were okay. Now, obviously this was before slap shots, but still it wasn't, the players weren't purposely trying to shoot at these guys' faces, right? And so it's the same sort of thing here where because you don't tackle above the shoulders and so on, it's, you know, you don't see it as much.
You're not as invincible, right? You put a helmet on, you feel invincible. So absolutely. And what's fun with what we are doing from a league perspective, there are certain rules that we can modify, we can change. That's not only going to make it safer for our players, but it's actually going to make it more exciting for the fans, especially that fan base here in the U.S. that have never watched a rugby match. So when they watch one of our matches for the first time, you get that open field playing. We want you, Mark, on a wing to make those exciting plays. Those are the exciting plays, right?
Yeah.
You know, football, when you get the quarterbacks that are out running and out passing, that's exciting football in our opinion. So the same thing can be applied within rugby by tweaking rules. It's going to make it more exciting for the fan. At the same notion, it's going to make it a heck of a lot more exciting for and safer for our players.
So let's talk a little bit about the NRFL and how you are hoping to launch. I mean, tell us what you can, and if there's stuff you can't, that's okay. But give me a sense of what you're hoping the timing will be going forward. And
yeah, I mean, again, this journey, I'll give you a little backstory and kind of our approach, which is important because we've been on this, as you said, a number of years, right? Any good overnight success has been in the basement for 4 years, and that's where we're at, but we're ready to go up some stories, if you will. So, you know, after we came back and not buying the lines, that's where we came back here and said, all right, if we want to build this league for the next generation fan, what would that look like? What would the capital look like? What would the ownership structure? How would we bring this to market? Knowing here in America, we have premium stadiums that sit dormant, right? Whether it be NFL, collegiate football, MLS stadiums that we can be content in. We have a fan base from September through the Super Bowl is addicted to tackle sports. So can we position this in the offseason, April through July? And then third, we have an untapped athletic pool base here. And that's where our journey first began, coming back here, partnering with the NFL, knowing every September, just over 1,000 guys get cut by NFL teams. There's nothing wrong with these guys. They're still 6'3", 250, where these are elite athletes. They just didn't make the Minnesota Vikings, the Cowboys, or maybe they had 2 years in the league, got dinged, got released. We know how difficult it is to truly have a 4+ career in the NFL. So that's where we first wanted to prove that thesis out. Yeah, you're a good football player, but, you know, can you come over to the sport of rugby? We held 8 combines, you know, synonymous with NFL combines. Ultimately, we sent 2 guys to England. We sent a guy to South Africa, Mecca countries in the sport of rugby, obviously. These former footballers were man of the match in a matter of months of picking up the ball. And really why that's important, right? I don't care what your sport is here in the U.S., if it's hockey, if it's baseball, golf, whatever your sport is, we want to watch the best in the world. That's why when Man U, Chelsea, Real Madrid, an international soccer team comes, does a friendly here in the U.S., they'll sell out an NFL stadium pretty darn quick. In the sport of rugby, the best players in the world don't go to one league. Some are in England. There's another league in France, which is a pretty good league. Some are in Japan, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa. And these rugby players are a very underpaid athlete. So we can afford to go get some of the best international talent, the skilled positions, the quarterbacks that take longer to master, marry that with the homegrown talent, the guys that come from the NFL, if you will. We can put on one of the most exciting products out of the chute. We can become the Premier League, if you will. But to your point, Mark, we know we have to go about it differently. You know, for us, for day one, it's never been about throwing a rugby ball on the pitch and watching some guys chase it around. How do we take it and bring this sport that's loved and played everywhere else, growing here in the U.S.? How do we bring it to that American fan? A lot of us on this call that honestly don't know much about the sport of rugby. You can look at what Formula One has done. Again, me coming from the NASCAR space. Formula One's the rest of the world's motorsports. And they've tried for decades to really get into the U.S. Unsuccessfully. COVID happened. Not sure if any of you have seen the program on Netflix called Drive to Survive, a docuseries, but that was a massive catalyst of bringing this foreign sport, this global sport, to a whole new fan base here in the U.S., where now 400,000 people go to Austin, Texas for a weekend to watch Formula One. Miami's had 2 races. Vegas had a race last year and another one coming up. You can even go further in time and look at what UFC did 20, 30 years ago, where 2 brothers out of Las Vegas bought it for $2 million. And back then it was actually an illegal sport in 37 states. So they bought an illegal sport. 15 years later, for when they bought it, they exited for over $4 billion. Right? So we truly feel rugby can be that next Formula One. It can be that next UFC story if you approach it right. And it's all these other verticals that are going to make people aware of it through our docuseries, our NRFL Studios production company. We're greenlighting a Hollywood film. Going back to my comment on the 1924 Olympics, we have a script in hand. Emmy award-winning director behind this project. From Web3 technology and blockchain through youth engagement. So it's all these other verticals that will make people aware of the sport. And then when they show up to the sport for that first time, the experience that you had, Mark, the experience that I have within NASCAR and in rugby, it becomes that aha moment. Like, I don't know what I just watched, but I want to learn more. I'm engaged. And that's ultimately how you start building the league.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that and then combine it with NASCAR. When I went to my first NASCAR race, maybe close to 20 years ago, and I was completely caught off guard and stunned at how different it is than watching it on TV. TV, you see the car's perspective and so on, but when you're there and your body is shaking from these 43 or whatever it is now cars that are, turning left, but they're going at 200 miles an hour. It's absolutely incredible, and you get really caught up in it. And the same I can say is with rugby. When you're seeing these men and women competing pretty close to you and so forth, and it's there's mud and there's sweat and there's a little bit of blood here and there and stuff. It's exciting to see it. It's a blast to play it. I think that taking a step back, you mentioned earlier that you would be sort of almost conceptually recruiting maybe some from the NFL and that sort of thing, but tell me a little bit more about some other sports that you feel the transition from that sport to rugby would be good.
Yeah, I mean, so our director of rugby, a gentleman by the name of Mick Byrne, arguably the best rugby skills coach in the world. We might be biased because he's on our team, but he's won 2 Rugby World Cups with the All Blacks. He's Australian. They called him Mick the Kick. He actually made the conversion from league to union, coached union, decorated background. He's with Fiji right now, as we speak. So there are certain positions that he's identified, we've identified, that we feel we can transition that American athlete in a quicker fashion compared to, again, I'll say the quarterbacks. They just do take longer to master that we'll have to get internationally until the American athlete gets up to speed. So outside of American football, wrestling, we've seen some success with athletes in the wrestling side. Hockey players that understand the free-flowing play, within hockey. We've had a couple basketball, former NBA guys that have crossed over that have the body that are tall. The biggest difference from some of these other sports outside of wrestling, say basketball and soccer for that matter, it's the mentality of an individual athlete. You could be a great basketball player, but now when I'm faced, Mark and I, one-on-one, and I have to tackle you, that's a whole nother mindset that some people as individuals just get it and embrace it and enjoy it.
Right.
And some just never will. Or it's just going to take longer to grow. We know some athletes, these elite athletes, that within about a 12-month period, we think they can convert to ultimately be some of the best rugby players in the world. Some it's going to take a couple years. But we start creating that pipeline of these athletes that now they are made aware of, hey, instead of just being a wrestler and trying to go to the Olympics, my career is over, or trying to make the NFL and I don't even make the practice squad, or whatever the case is, there's a whole new outlet for these guys. And for us, as we did these combines and held these combines with a mixed bag of athletes here in the U.S., our biggest one out at the LA Coliseum in LA for a number of days, a full week, the reactions you get from not only the players, but from their parents. where literally a couple of weeks prior, they were on a NFL team with a salary cap with a couple $100 million with their potential to make a league minimum, which is a lot of money. Now they have nothing. They're lost. They don't know what to do, right? They've been their whole dream, their whole life has been to be the NBA or be into the NFL. So it becomes really emotional, not only for us, but obviously for them, that we can be the outlet for these athletes to really extend their athletic career.
Now, do you see the same sort of pipeline coming from pickleball? I'm joking. All right. Anyways.
You never know.
You never know. That's right. No offense to the pickleball players out there. Anyways, so Jason has a question. He's asking, would you try and bring your media play TV/movie to NBC Peacock as a live rugby home strategically?
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to one of your first comments, why hasn't rugby really taken off here in the U.S.? One of it also has to come the ability for emerging leagues back in the day, when the NBA had competition, the original spring football league and football leagues that tried to compete with the NFL. Back then, you had to get a media deal with about 4 broadcasters, one of the 4. You didn't, you weren't able to watch it anywhere. Now through social, through technology, through Peacock streaming services, you can see what Apple is doing with an MLS, right, which has transformed that league. Messi was a massive catalyst of getting him, who transformed, not only Miami to the league, but even helped transform Apple TV. From Netflix is starting to dabble even more in live, whether they're going to do it full time or not. So what's, again, exciting for us as a startup emerging league, not only do our broadcast partners have the ability to broadcast our matches and our games, we also have our version of Drive to Survive that we're producing. We have the Hollywood film that we're going to produce. So we have a storyboard of content. That sports content is still king, right? It is truly the last appointment television that's out there. So we have options. Back to your point, Jason, and question, Jason. We're in conversations with all the major players, from the Amazons, Apples of the world, to the Fox and NBCs and Peacocks of the world. Our biggest thing is we want to make it accessible. You can have the best product in the world, but if I have to go behind a paywall to this, to that, and I don't even know where to get it, you're going to lose a lot of people. So we will have the capital to make it accessible. So when I want to watch that movie, when I want to watch that docuseries, now when I want to watch an NRFL match, I know where to go and where to get my content. So it's an exciting time to be in emerging league because all these major players out there are dying for content like ours.
Well, they really are. And it's and, I guess, when I think about it and think about everything that's available right now to capture our eyeballs and earballs or whatever it is, right? There's just so much overall content out there. And I think what we need to do is just kind of think, well, what is it that can label it a success? Like, at what point is rugby saying, wow, we captured X amount of people out there? Because it's such massive competition. I mean, obviously the NFL's got their big chunk. We got baseball with a little bit, this and that. But, is it something where, do you envision this is going to take several years to grow the popularity, or is it something that might go viral pretty quick, especially with the movie and so on?
So I'll say this, our approach is different, right? Just to, again, throw a rugby ball in if you build it, they will come, will not work. If we wanted to be a semi-professional league just playing rugby, we would have done that a long time ago. So there's a pathway to bring over that fan base, what Formula One has done and so forth. I think a good parallel in kind of answering that question, you can look at UFC. UFC's been around for forever. Reportedly now a $10 billion global brand under Endeavor, and WWE's part of that. A rival brand came up. I mean, that's almost silly to say, you know what, I want to start a new mixed martial arts league and go against UFC. So about 6 years ago, Professional Fighters League. So they said, you know what, there is so much pie within MMA. There's a massive audience globally that we really don't realize. Yes, UFC is big from an American perspective, but still they're missing a big gap internationally. So they said, you know what, there's a way if we can rethink how the sport is looked at. So they made some modifications to UFC. It's more of a traditional league standpoint and points and all this different things. So they modified some of it. And within a 6-year period, of going against UFC, the biggest dog in the world, and they still are the biggest dog. They're now worth over $1 billion, approaching $2 billion, right? So
Amazing.
our ability to take the most under-commercialized, undervalued sport globally, which rugby is. UFC, MMA was not, because you have UFC and the capitalization of it. That's why private equity got in the game. So it is the most underserved market out there. Everything from youth to technology to blockchain to the professional level. That presents us a massive opportunity in how we build this league. So is it going to take a moment? Yes. It's not like building an apartment building within, 12, 24 months, you're rolling. But yet, based on the notion of being under commercialized, we can start driving revenue, ultimately profitability within a number of year period, building to ultimately a multi-billion-dollar league. And there's no question we can get there, knowing in 2031, the Rugby World Cup, which is the third largest event in the world behind the Summer Olympics and the Soccer World Cups, is going to be hosted in the U.S. for the men's and 33 for the women's.
Yeah.
So that gives us a proper ramp-up period to not only produce the best league in the world, for all the reasons I mentioned, but be the leading media and entertainment property in the sport of rugby. And again, you can look at, I'm a firm believer that history repeats itself. You can look how MLS started back in the day, 30 years ago, and that was all reactionary to the Soccer World Cup that was coming to the U.S. 8 wealthy guys got together and said, well, wait, we better have some kind of professional soccer league here before this World Cup thing comes. MLS was born. And, MLS has kind of had this journey here in the U.S. So we've presented ourselves, again, with a different approach in a different era than it was 30 years ago to ultimately produce what we need to do. And we truly feel that America will catch on to the sport of rugby through all these other attributes. And I'll leave you with this other personal experience of mine. I have 2 little girls, 13-year-old and 11-year-old. They play multiple sports. Both of them play soccer. I'm not a huge soccer fan, so sorry to all the soccer people out there. It is the global game. I get it. There is a program on FX here in the U.S. called Welcome to Wrexham. I'm like, I'm in the business. I better check it out. It's the story of Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, 2 Hollywood actors, going and buying a team in Welsh, I believe, right, in Wales for a couple $1 million. It was like a 5th, 6th tier team out there. So it's a docuseries. One knew something about soccer. Ryan Reynolds didn't. Just their journey of buying it, the people behind the story, the scenes, the fans that have been, 90 years old trying to watch their soccer team in this little town in Wales. And I'll tell you now, after watching that series for the 3rd season, I believe, I want to buy a stupid Wrexham jersey. I'm a fan. I follow their athletes. So the power of storytelling, the power of content production, aligning that with sports betting and technology. So it's all these things here in the U.S. that once we activate those, people will start to fall in love with the sport of rugby.
Good. So I've got a couple last questions, but one of them is there going to be any major difference, sort of whether it's rule-wise or the way the game is played with your league, whether between some of the other leagues that are going on?
Yeah, I mean, again, we looked at what's going on here in the U.S. As I said, it's a growing sport, no question about it. But we can't fool ourselves. It's still small in comparison to the big 5 sports leagues here. There's other leagues, a semi-professional league here in the U.S. They're playing rugby. They've been playing, for a number of teams, a number of seasons, if you will. But in our opinion, it's still very semi-professional. Mm-hmm. There's a big difference from single A baseball to the New York Yankees. Their players do get paid, which is great. But yet they still have primary jobs as a lawyer, plumber, marketing, whatever their profession is. They're playing in front of 1,000 rugby passionate fans. We're truly that next evolution. We're that Formula One model of how do you take this sport? Let's get it out of just the rugby community. They're a passionate crowd, but we need to take it to that next fan base. So, yeah, there's things we're doing from a content, from a media, from an entertainment, from a rules and presentation, because we're going to have the budget, the capital So when I watch it on TV, when I watch it mobilely, when I go to a game, it truly feels like what professionals should be like. It's played in a proper venue. So there's a number of things that need to happen, but it takes the right strategic partners. It takes the right strategic capital to ultimately do what we're doing.
So that's a perfect segue into my next question. What is that amount of capital that you'd love to see come into the sport or come into you guys? And, how do you expect to allocate it?
Yeah, so some of that falls under NDA. And I know I was looking at the participant list. We do have let's see, I'm just going to scroll. Yeah, we have a couple owners that are in this chat. So investors, if you will, that are part of this, which is exciting. So it's good to see them. But ultimately, it's 9 figures of capital that needs to initially come into it. But how we're going to bring this to market is even more important. Even this year, we call it Find Our Heroes, right? It's important. Doesn't matter the sport. I referenced Leo Messi a little bit ago. We fall in love with superstars. Doesn't matter the sport, right? We follow our superstars. That's why LeBron James, a number of years ago, had a thing on network television, primetime. It was a show called The Decision. It was all about where he's going to take his talents. Where I'm taking my talents to South Beach, and he went to Miami. Well, millions of more fans became Miami fans because LeBron James, went there. We have to create that in the sport of rugby. You have to create the lead actors. You have to create the superstars. So this year we're greenlighting NRFL Studios, our production company. We're going to start executing a number of talent deals. We're going to go find that next Michael Jordan, LeBron James. They come into our performance center. We have a partnership with the NFL alumni, building content, media, resources, greenlights our Hollywood film. So it starts creating that intrigue, that welcome to Wrexham moment, if you will.
Yeah.
So then in 2025, we will bring a number of teams on tour, our showcase series, if you will. So now the fans that have been watching the building of the league can now touch, taste, and feel. So festival-like environment, we'll go to, say, Atlanta for a full weekend. The best of what Atlanta has to offer, music, entertainment, family-friendly, because that will draw in that Atlanta area to say, I need to go to this event. It looks exciting. Also opportunity for us to invite friendlies. We'll invite South Africa, New Zealand, England to be part of this event, because our thesis is once you come and experience rugby for the first time, we truly feel it will sell a number of Americans. Not everyone, we get it, but a number of them. So we go on tour in 2025, and then 2026 leads into 8 teams, starting with 8 teams, still in a touring model. But now the games count, win-loss with playoffs.
Something just came to me. I have to tell you that out of all the jerseys I have, my rugby jerseys are the coolest. I mean, rugby shirts, rugby jerseys are amazing, but that's a whole nother thing. So Jen has a couple of comments / questions, and I just want to bring them out. So one of them, she says, since rugby is now a very prominent D1 sport, recruiting alone has brought a lot of college athletes around the country to schools they wouldn't have necessarily thought of, which is true. But she also says it's hard to believe that it's taking so long since so many kids with money are now playing bigger than when back in the day, we'll say. So, from the grassroots side of things, does that happen because something like the NRFL happens, or is it just a growing love of the sport coming from kids and coming from the bottom?
Yeah, I mean, right now, if a kid is playing rugby, a couple of reasons. One, maybe their dad played it. Maybe it's a military kid. Maybe it's an expat that was introduced to it, or maybe his friend played it. And, even here in Minnesota, it's a pretty big club sport, at many of the high schools. It's still not mainstream, right? It's still not known to a number of people. Our notion, we're kind of the top-down model. Now there's a place for our players to aspire to be. Right. When we're born here in the U.S., you have a baseball, a football, a hockey puck, a soccer ball now in the birthing room. Definitely not a rugby ball. In New Zealand, you're born with the rugby ball in your hands. So we need to change that notion. But that goes back to you got to create. You have to have aspirations. I grew up a Michael Jordan fan, a Kirby Puckett fan, a Bo Jackson fan, who's also part of us and on our board. But there's aspiration to be there, fully knowing only a half a percent are fully going to make there. So you got to create that top-down model where there's somewhere to go. It becomes more accessible. It becomes more visible, because me, as we're starting with that 22-year-old to make that conversion, our mission is how do you make that 16-year-old then convert over to rugby? Now, how do you make that 12-year-old to make that transition? And then how do you make that 8-year-old that their decision out of their introduction into sports is to play rugby? And starting with, touch rugby, there's a lot of things you want to do within rugby before you start tackling. So you got to create that top-down model, that funnel, if you will, from the professional all the way down to the youth.
And so right now, today, Steve, who are the best introductions, best people you could be meeting that would be most useful and helpful to you, that the people that are watching this, whether they're here in the Clubroom event or watching it later online, who would be the most use to you?
Yeah, hey, we've talked, Mark, and I've talked with a number of people. I spend 8 days out of the 7 talking with interesting people. We are foolish enough to do this. We are smart enough to know we can't do this alone, right? So from an investor perspective, that's first and foremost, of all walks of life. And that's where, we looked at and studied a lot of leagues that have come and gone, all the spring football leagues, soccer leagues, other rugby leagues, and really 3 reasons, why they fail. 1, being undercapitalized, 2, rushing to market, 3, picking the wrong initial investors. And that's where we looked at it from an investor perspective. And we looked at the 153 people that currently own professional sports today. It's only 153 of them. They all relatively look the same, and they're all multi-billionaires, right? Out of the big 5. That's just the entry point to get in that country club. Yet you look at professional sports, it truly is a good investable asset class. It's one of the leading alternative investments out there, but it's not accessible. So it's our mission to ensure men, women, and beasts can be sitting at our ownership table to own equity, and not just one, but you can own equity in our founding 8 teams. So yeah, we need support, knowing we don't know everyone in this world. It's a matter of having conversations, which we know conversations are free. And then 2, from a strategic perspective, it does come down to the jockeys and our strategic partners. As we've heard a number of, doesn't matter any business, all these great ideas, but it comes down to execution and the people behind it. So whether it's strategic partners, and I've talked to a few of you today prior to this call, that whether have services, have ideas, have strategic alignment, because it's people like that come together in the scrum in rugby terms that can ultimately make this happen.
Nice. Perfect. Good. Well, I'll make sure that we all sort of start putting our heads together about who we can team you up with across the board. But I truly appreciate your time today, Steve. Thanks for sharing your sort of vision of where you hope that this league will go. I know it's not just your singular vision. There's a big team behind you, but it's such an amazingly it's such an athletic sport. It's exciting. It's physical, but it's a blast. And I think once people get more and more in tune with it, everything's going to skyrocket. So I'm excited for your future for sure. And thanks for sharing it with us.
Hey, appreciate the time, Mark, and the platform and what you do on this platform, and everyone else for showing up. I appreciate you taking a moment to hear me talk on.
Oh, well, it's all good. Well, thanks so much, Steve. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks.
All right.
Thanks, Mark.